This week on Roundtable, the heat is on and it's more than just a weather story, how climate change is killing us, and why it's getting harder to recruit the first responders we need to deal with the state's fires. Also, we check in with San Diego's Latino and Latinx reporters as they mentor a new generation of journalists during Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm Christina Kim, and KPBS Roundtable starts now.
Your wedding video might have been made by the director of Marvel's Shang-Chi.
I did a lot of wedding videos in order to just pay the bills.
So you're telling me there are people out there with wedding videos that they can say were directed by the director of the latest Marvel film?
Yeah, there are. There's quite a few.
Find out more about this fast-rising filmmaker as we delve into his origin story. Then, Geeky Gourmet will show you how to make the Chinese porridge in the film and more Asian treats. Plus, we'll preview next month's spy theme with Share Your Addiction and Cold Turkey.
Question: why do James Bond fans hate Quantum of Solace with the vehemence that they do?
I'm your host, Beth Accomando. Find Cinema Junkie at kpbs.org/cinemajunkie or wherever you get your podcasts.
Disasters aren't going to stop. That's the nature of the climate threat. But we know what we have to do. We just need to summon the courage and the creativity to do it. Yes, we face a crisis, but we face a crisis with an unprecedented opportunity to create good jobs of the future, create industries of the future, to win the future, to save the planet.
That's President Joe Biden wrapping up a tour of Western states this week in Colorado. In the midst of addressing COVID-19 and helping California's governor survive a recall vote, Biden is taking his time out west to push for his trillion-dollar plan to beat back the effects of climate change. Effects that more and more people are feeling. America is wrapping up the hottest summer since the Dust Bowl, according to the National Weather Agency, NOAA. Temperatures were nearly 3 degrees hotter than average. It can be hard to quantify that, but let me tell you, I can tell the difference when it's 90 degrees in my home instead of 87 degrees. In California and several other Western states, it was the hottest summer on record. So, what does this mean for our daily lives, and what can we expect in the future? Here to help us parse this all out is Haley Smith. She's an environment reporter for the LA Times. Welcome back to Roundtable, Haley.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We're seeing extreme weather all over the country. The Gulf Coast just got hit with its second major storm in a matter of weeks. And it's often these weather events like storms that capture people's attention and come to define climate change. But you say that extreme heat is among the deadliest natural disasters. How has high heat impacted people this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. So the devastating heat wave that blanketed much of the Pacific Northwest in June has been linked to hundreds of deaths, including immigrant farm workers and the elderly. That heat wave was also estimated to have killed more than 1 billion sea creatures off the coast of Vancouver, and it's been linked to a near complete loss of young Chinook salmon in the Sacramento River because of abnormally warm waters. So heat waves are definitely dangerous, not just for people, but for most living creatures.
You just alluded to this, but high heat, of course, doesn't impact everyone equally. Who is most vulnerable in California as the weather begins to heat up? And really, what's being done to address these inequities?
Well, elderly people are certainly among the most vulnerable because as you age, your cardiovascular system starts to deteriorate, which means that it often has to go into overdrive just to keep you cool. Experts told me that high temperatures, and that's not just temperatures in the hundreds, but even in the 80s and 90s, can be really dangerous for the elderly for that reason. Extreme heat has also been linked to increases in early deliveries among pregnant women, which can endanger both the mother and the child. And of course, the heat poses a danger to people who spend a lot of time outdoors. So farm workers, people experiencing homelessness. In terms of what's being done, the answer is sort of sadly not too much. Cities do things like open cooling centers, but those became dangerous for a different reason during the pandemic. And then climate warming overall, as we know, is a major existential crisis.
Right. I know San Diego activates cooling centers when it gets really hot, as well as many other cities. And as you mentioned, COVID-19 made it hard to gather people in these cool spaces. But you also, in your reporting, brought up a good point on the dependence of air conditioning. How does, using air conditioning feed into this cycle of emission that causes climate change in the first place?
Well, so this is sort of the great irony, right? Air conditioning is starting to become a necessity in California and will likely only be more so in the years to come. But air conditioners also use energy and contribute to emissions that sort of exacerbate that climate change cycle that's driving the warming in the first place. So during heat waves, especially, air conditioners pull a ton of energy from the state's electric grid because everyone is running them at the same time. Last week, it got so critical that the California Independent System Operator, which runs most of the state's power grid, asked for an emergency declaration that would allow some of their gas-fired power plants to generate more power, even if it meant violating air pollution limits. So again, they're trying to keep people safe and cool, but it's all part of this sort of worsening cycle that we're getting stuck in.
Of course, when we talk about heat and climate change in California, that really translates to fire. Each year, our fire season continues to grow longer and longer. It's pretty much a year-round season now. I know you were recently up by the Calder Fire just south of Lake Tahoe. When you were reporting there, did you get a sense of why, areas like South Lake Tahoe are becoming more vulnerable to fire and, how climate change is really contributing to it?
Yeah, you bring up a great point because heat and fire are sort of inextricably linked at this point. Increasing heat and also the worsening drought in California are really priming the state's landscape to burn. So they're sort of baking all the vegetation so that even the smallest spark can ignite a fire and leave it with a ton of fuel to feed on. So for that reason, there are many things about fire this year that are unusual, including the fact that Caldor fire and also the Dixie fire further north of it became the first two fires to ever burn from one side of the Sierra to the other. And not only were they the first two fires to do that, but they both did it within the same month. And the Calder Fire also made an unexpected sort of performance when it sort of jumped over a granite ridge that many people thought would act as a barrier between the fire and the Tahoe Basin. At some points, the fire behavior was so erratic that winds were sending embers into the air that were landing more than a mile away, which often would ignite a new fire. So long story short, all of these factors, heat and dryness and the drought, are all sort of contributing to this crazy, unexpected, unprecedented fire behavior we're seeing this year.
I know as part of that kind of erratic fire behavior, especially in the Calder Fire, you noted that the fire appeared to burn at much higher elevations. Why were firefighters saying that's so unusual?
So we've already documented that California's fires are getting faster and larger and more frequent. But as these recent studies have found, and as we saw with the Caldor Fire, they're also literally reaching new heights as they're advancing higher up mountains. So in the past, higher elevation areas, if you think like 8,000 feet or more, were usually pretty moist thanks to rain and snowpack, but all the heat and the drought have once again dried that vegetation out, evaporated a lot of that water, which is enabling the fires to climb further up these mountains and reach new elevations. So in the Sierras, for example, researchers said fires are burning about 1,400 feet higher in elevation than they were in the 1980s.
You mentioned in this last fire that you were covering, the Calder Fire, that, it was able to jump from the Sierras and that it's just been such kind of erratic, unexpected fire behavior. Are there lessons that we can already learn from that fire?
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, the lesson is that fire behavior is becoming increasingly unpredictable. And so forest management is becoming more important than ever. And just, preparing communities ahead of time for these really sort of unpredictable fires is hugely important, meaning having evacuation plans in place, meaning cities also need to prepare ahead of time for mass evacuations. What we've seen in the past, and this happened in the Caldor Fire, is traffic jams when everyone is trying to get out of town and there's one road out and they're trying to evacuate quickly. So thinking ahead, planning for exit routes and things that might go wrong is probably going to become increasingly necessary in the years to come.
You report that 2 million acres have burned so far in 2021. When you talked with firefighters and other experts, can you just put into context what 2 million acres really means and how that's going to impact the state's climate and just other firefighting efforts?
Sure. So for context, 2020 was the worst wildfire season in California's recorded history, and about 4.2 million acres burned that year. That record shattered previous records by more than twice, I think nearly 3 times. So this year, we are already on pace with where we were at the same time in 2020. And it's worth noting that many of the really big fires last year, including the Creek Fire, the Glass Fire, and the Bobcat Fire here in Los Angeles, didn't even start until September. So we're just reaching the peak of fire season right now. And it doesn't necessarily further climate change so much as it is indicative of climate change.
You just said it. We're really in the midst of that kind of peak fire risk time. Do you have a sense of what we can expect in the short term in Southern California?
Yes, I feel like I'm just being Debbie Downer today, but the honest answer is that the outlook is not great for the remainder of the year. It's largely for more heat and more dryness. And that's worrisome because we still haven't had much rain. So vegetation that was critically dry going into the summer is just going to be that much drier coming out of it. That said, some of the other fire factors like wind and lightning are harder to predict, especially weeks or months out. So there's still a chance we could get lucky.
You know, Haley, you just said you feel like you're bringing the bearer of bad news, but you are keeping us informed. I do want to have just one question that I think our listeners can also benefit from. It can just seem like the world is ending. You know, these high heat temperatures we've all been living through, these fires that are always burning. I mean, how do you keep kind of an optimism that is also based in reality, even as you report on this and you look towards solutions?
To be honest with you, this is a question that I think about all the time. I think, it's maybe a cliche, but there's this expression about looking for the helpers. Look at the firefighters who are putting their lives on the line every day. Look at the people who are trying to make a difference for farm workers and the homeless, people that are suffering in these heat waves. And just try to focus on the small things that we can do personally because we've got some big problems to face in the years to come.
I've been talking with Haley Smith. She covers the environment for the LA Times. Thank you, Haley.
Thanks so much.
Whenever we talk about heat and climate, we're also talking about economics and equity. Who can afford to be safe? We often mention those most vulnerable, but it also extends to those who take on the job of trying to protect our communities. It's dangerous work, and with the rising cost of living in California, more and more folks are deciding it's just not worth it. Just ask Escondido Fire Chief Rick Vogt.
A lot of people think that, there's thousands of people standing in line to get jobs as paramedics and firefighters. And that might have been true 20, 25 years ago. But boy, we've seen a change.
San Diego County fire stations are becoming increasingly understaffed. That raises so many questions about public safety when disaster strikes, and just how much we're willing to go to invest in our climate future. KPBS North County reporter Tanya Thorne covered this recently, and she joins us now. Hey, Tanya.
Hey, Christina.
Okay, so the average price for a local home in San Diego County now exceeds $700,000, according to CoreLogic. Housing is a big factor in how people decide what jobs they pursue. And as you found, a lot of firefighters just can't afford to live here. What kind of pay can an entry-level firefighter expect?
Yeah, Christina, housing is a huge factor on where people decide to pursue any job opportunity. And through this report, I learned that firefighter pay varies from city to city and county to county. And the requirements to be a firefighter vary too. So pay is really going to depend on where you apply, on what education you have, and what the fire department itself is requiring for entry level or any firefighters that decide to look for a job there. One example, though, an entry-level firefighter in Poway can look to make between $60,000 to $90,000 a year, depending on their experience, if they were to apply today.
I know you talked with Dave Miller from Palomar College Fire Academy. Here's some of what he had to say about that very challenge of recruiting and retaining folks locally.
And I'll be honest with you, if you go north of the San Diego County line, there's a significant jump in pay and often a reduction in requirements.
So what I'm hearing here is that San Diego County is losing firefighters to other counties that pay more and are maybe more safe. Where are firefighters heading?
Sadly, yes. One of the fire chiefs I spoke to said that their department recently lost 6 firefighters that went to work for Orange County and LA County fire departments. He said the pay can have a 30% increase maybe in those areas. So this really leaves San Diego with a staffing shortage and a disadvantage because Orange County and LA are so close. And also other departments in LA or Orange County or other counties can also have less entry requirements, or they can even provide training on site. So recruits that are graduating the academy are more likely to look into those areas before even considering San Diego for a job.
This summer, President Joe Biden issued an executive order to raise the pay of federal firefighters. What is that going to do here locally for us?
Well, locally, I think most would think that this includes all firefighters, right? But this only includes Fed Fire in San Diego, and they mostly work out of military bases. So we may see it in Miramar and Camp Pendleton, and also the Forest Service stations. And I believe the closest one to us is in the Cleveland National Forest, and that covers wildland fires.
So I think a lot of people are probably thinking, who exactly gets to decide the funding for these fire agencies and ultimately their salaries?
So it really varies from county to county, city to city, department to department. But locally, most fire departments here within our cities are funded through the city. And that can be through sales tax, through property taxes. And that really does come down to the voters. So if voters decide on a property tax increase, that could mean that fire departments could expand into more staffing, into higher pay. And also unions come into play because unions represent many of these firefighters. And so there has to be a negotiation between the city and the firefighters in order to come to a fair pay.
We heard from Escondido Fire Chief Rick Vogt at the top of this. He actually has a larger role as the head of the county's Fire Chief Association. Did he say anything about current efforts to secure more money, or really just how prepared San Diego County is to fight fires this season?
Yeah, well, Rick Vogt told me that one of the things that they're doing are looking into grants to fund some of these positions. But, with grant money, once that runs out, that position could ultimately be terminated. And again, we're looking at a staff shortage. And when you have competitive markets, really close to us, Orange County and LA County, we really have to go and talk to our city and our policymakers into increasing funding and making these positions more appealing for graduates. So we need to make these positions more appealing for them so that we can increase, our staff within our fire departments. And that's ultimately going to really have us prepared for any type of fire as we approach fire season. But again, he did say that, we partner with a lot of different entities. So there's CAL FIRE, all the different cities and departments work together. Whenever there is a fire that comes up and, we all see it, we see firefighters coming in from different states and cities, just helping each other out when something happens.
A lot to keep following up on. I've been talking with KPBS North County reporter Tanya Thorne. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thanks, Christina.
In the years since the COVID-19 pandemic reached the United States, we're seeing signs of hope, yet we still have a long way to go. Hi, I'm Midday Edition host Maureen Cavanaugh, and here at KPBS, we continue to double down on coverage, serving as your eyes and ears so you'll know how to keep yourself and your family safe as we navigate these uncertain times. We can't do this important work without your help. Contributing listeners provide the biggest share of our funding. Please join them. Give now at kpbs.org/donate. And thanks for listening to the KPBS Midday Edition podcast.
Heat isn't just impacting who can afford to work and live in San Diego. In some cases, it's actually cutting into workers' wages. In a special report this week, KPBS Eric Anderson spoke to climate researcher Christina Dahl.
A recent report, Too Hot to Work, from the Union of Concerned Scientists, finds outdoor workers face higher risks as the number of extreme heat days goes up and the intensity of heat spells increases.
Between now and the middle of the century, outdoor workers are going to increasingly lose work time because it's too hot to work. And in many cases, that's going to mean that they will lose out on potential earnings as well.
That's an estimated $55 billion in wages lost by 2050. Check it and other stories out on kpbs.org or on the KPBS YouTube channel. Here on Roundtable, we spotlight the important stories being told by reporters in our region. The networks that help them thrive is a big part of the work they do. We wanted to carve out a few minutes to check in on one of those. Andrea Lopez Villafaña is a neighborhood reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune. She's also the president of the San Diego and Tijuana chapter of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, also called NAHJ. They have a lot going on to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, which began Wednesday. Welcome back to Roundtable, Andrea.
Hey, great to be here with you.
Before we dive in, I just have to ask your thoughts on Hispanic Heritage Month. I know there's a lot of tension around the labels people use, from Hispanic to Latino to Latinx or Latin. What do you think of this month? How are you thinking about it, especially now?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been really interesting to me. I guess growing up, I never realized that it was that big of a thing until I started working in media. You know, we're always looking for stories for Hispanic Heritage Month. And this is kind of a conversation that we always have with NHJ and as a board, especially with like what we should do for this month and different things like that. But I mean, personally, I love seeing a focus on stories of Latinos in our community. But, you know, I think that should just be something that happens year round. So that's
exactly
kind of my take. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly why some folks are critical, right? They are kind of wary of 1 month being dedicated to them and their stories instead of, say, like a whole year or every day. But there is a sense that this month allows for the claiming of space. You kind of already mentioned this, but what do you think is the power or the opportunity of this month? And really, how is NHJ kind of capitalizing on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the power of this month, I really do think, like, as you said, it's unfortunate that like there has to be 1 month, right? Like we'd want to see these incredible stories of so many people in our communities all year round. But I think it also helps, you know, at least reporters, I'm thinking like us as reporters with NHJ, it helps us bring some of these stories that maybe might not be kind of stories that our editors are interested in. And so it gives us an opportunity to highlight people we might not be able to highlight normally. And also for reporters who aren't Latino, might give them an opportunity to increase their sources or build out their sources with communities and people who they might not interact with daily. So it's an opportunity to highlight the greater community in general.
Well, I know NAHJ is teaming up with someone familiar to KPBS listeners, former border reporter and current LA Times columnist Jean Guerrero. What do you have going on in the local chapter?
Yeah. So we're celebrating our 2021 scholarship program and our scholarship recipients. We have 2 young ladies who are actually journalism students at San Diego State University. And we wanted to, you know, kind of host a little celebration for them. We're going to have a luncheon at Mujeres Brew House in Logan Heights on October 9th from 12 to 2 p.m. It's going to be fun. We're going to have tacos and drinks and headshots for people. And we're also going to have Jean, who's going to give our keynote speech. She's always been a great supporter of our organization. And she is, you know, has been a mentor for so many of us. I've always looked up to her and I always still do. So we'll have her and then we'll give away the $3,000, which will be split between the scholarship winners.
How do these scholarships work, and why is NAHJ kind of focused really on this next generation of reporters?
Yeah, so I mean, our scholarship program is pretty simple. We don't grade the actual scholarships. Another chapter does that for us. So, you know, we just open up the application to any student who is interested in working in Spanish language media or having a focus in the Latino community. And that all goes back to not just increasing representation of Latinos in the newsroom, but also increasing representations of Latinos in our coverage. So the focus is to have, you know, award someone who has a dedication for uplifting the stories of Latinos in our community. Every year, I think this is our 4th year doing the scholarship, and every year we've been able to fundraise more money, and that money is usually donated. We've had for the 2nd year in a row The San Diego Union Tribune donated $1,000, and then everything else just comes from our members who are supportive of our mission and our goals.
I'm really glad that you brought up newsroom diversity. I think, this year, last year, we're talking a lot about how we need to diversify our workspaces, and newsrooms are definitely a big part of that. I know Latinos make up more than 30% of San Diego County, but that's rarely what we see in our local newsrooms, particularly at the editor level. You've kind of alluded to this already, but why is it important to have Latinos in the news making the news?
Yeah. I mean, and not just Latinos, right? We want to have newsrooms that represent our community, right? We want more Black reporters, more Asian reporters, more LGBTQ reporters in our newsrooms. And having individuals and having a diverse group of individuals in the newsroom means that you're coming at stories with a different lens, right? You have ability to connect with different communities, sometimes even speak the language, which was just huge. I mean, being able to speak the language with some of these communities really gives you a lot of access, and it really helps you write or produce a better story when you're able to connect with individuals in their own language, and being able to identify certain cultural barriers or obstacles that might present themselves when you're working on a story, or just identifying story ideas in general. Being able to familiarize yourself with these communities. That's why it's important to uplift these voices.
It's clear NHJ plays a huge role for journalists here. So for folks listening who want to support the work that you're doing, what can they do?
Yeah, they can donate to our scholarship. We have a GoFundMe page. You can just search 2021 NHJ Scholarship and donate there. Or you can purchase tickets to our event, even if you can't make it for whatever reason. The proceeds from our scholarship event will go to next year's scholarship. So the more tickets we sell, the more money we'll be able to give out next year.
I've been talking with Andrea Lopez Villafaña, president of the San Diego Tijuana chapter of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you.
And before we say goodbye, we can't end the week without touching on the story that had all eyes on California.
No is not the only thing that was expressed tonight. I want to focus on what we said yes to as a state. We said yes to science. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to ending this pandemic. We said yes to people's right to vote without fear of fake fraud or voter suppression. We said yes to women's fundamental constitutional right to decide for herself what she does with her body, her fate and future.
Governor Gavin Newsom is staying put, and so are all the major issues still on his plate. With nearly $300 million spent on the recall, a lot of people are wondering, should the recall system be reformed? A question we know we'll be tackling on Roundtable. But for now, as we head into the weekend, a shout out to all our election workers and volunteers during this latest exercise in California's democracy. Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of the KPBS Roundtable, and thank you to my guests, Haley Smith from the LA Times, Tanya Thorne from KPBS News, and Union Tribune reporter and local NAHJ chapter president, Andrea Lopez Villafaña. If you missed any part of our show, you can listen anytime on the KPBS Roundtable podcast. I'm Cristina Kim. Join us next week on the Roundtable.